Well, Nicole Rogerson is the CEO of Autism Awareness Australia, and she joins me here in the studio. Nicole, welcome. Thanks for coming in. They're lofty ambitions. Are they achievable?
Oh, well, I'd like to think so. Everyone would like to think so. I mean, essentially, we're welcoming the fact there's a national autism strategy. The autism community have been asking for one for decades, so it's fantastic that it's here. In saying that, it is a very big shopping list of lofty goals, and I worry that it's a missed opportunity because I think there's some really key issues in there that have been skipped over, unfortunately. And I think there are certain goals around, employment and inclusion, which are really important. But if we're not getting some of the key fundamentals right around early intervention and support and education, then we're never going to reach those goals anyway. And I do worry that it's a lovely glossy report that may sit on a shelf.
OK, let's start at the beginning then, and that is diagnosis. I mean, is there a backlog of people waiting to see? Because we have a shortage of psychiatrists and paediatricians. Yeah,
we do. Look, we've known for a really long time, particularly with young children, the earlier the better that we get a diagnosis so we can start that early intervention and support. Diagnosis, it was right to be called out in the strategy. Part of the problem there, though, is yes, diagnoses are hard to get and they're quite expensive, particularly in the private system. There's long wait lists in the public system. But then we have to decide what happens after diagnosis. After diagnosis, we need those children to have access to good quality early intervention and therapies. We need the school system to be set up and ready to appropriately educate these children. And we cannot look at this strategy in isolation from other NDIS reforms that are happening right now that are having a massive impact on our community, particularly when it comes to paediatrics.
Let's go to the NDIS in a moment. Let's stick with education. So what is the current situation for people living with autism, children living with autism in Australia? Are there special schools available? Are there special resources available within a mainstream school?
There are certainly special schools that are available, but for the vast majority of children with autism, it is appropriate for them to go to their local school within their local community, and that's what we want. We want to build inclusive schools and communities. But in saying that, children with autism have challenges in those settings, and those settings are not set up for children that learn a little differently and may have sensory and behavioural challenges. So you can sort of say we should have inclusive education, and we should, I agree, but you have to be real and say, are we ready for it? And I know I've spent the better part of the last year talking to state education ministers around the country, and they are not ready to take on the burden of managing and supporting and being the main line of support for autistic students, which is what the NDIS reforms are leading to.
OK, so a child with autism may well leave school without being ready for the workplace, which is the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, in the strategy, there's the talk about the importance of diagnosis and getting those. It's an important discussion about the community having peer-to-peer resources. It's not that any of those things are not true. There's nothing in the strategy. There's a couple of things that are a little bit silly, but on the whole, there's nothing in there that is incorrect. But it's a little bit like saying, we need to make sure that second-storey bathroom is absolutely perfect when we don't have the foundations right of the house. So there's just some key things that are missing that really worry me, and I feel like this is a missed opportunity.
OK, so let's talk about the NDIS then, and how do the problems that are being experienced there feed in to the work that you do?
Well, I think the minister would like to say they're not related, but they don't live in splendid isolation. The federal government has a problem with the NDIS. It's been a runaway train and headlines of costs. Minister Shorten on his way out has come in with a big red pen and said we're going to make some changes, and these changes are going to see a reduction in the cost of the NDIS. He has already said that a third of the budget savings that are going to come with these reforms are going to come as a result of getting children out of the NDIS. Now, if the government has decided that children should not be recipients of funds under the NDIS, fine, great. If it's going to be a state's problem, OK, I'll even go along with that. But the states are not ready to pick up that slack. I've spent the better part of this year talking to education ministers around the country who look petrified because education is where it's going to hit first. If these kids are no longer getting support in the NDIS, they're not getting psychologists, they're not getting speech pathologists, behavioural therapists, and then we're going to enrol them in school with no support and ask an already struggling school system that has teacher retention issues. I feel terribly sorry for the states. I said a year ago, and I just wish it didn't come true, is the federal government cannot throw the ball if the states are not ready to pick it up, and that is exactly what is happening right now.
Okay, interesting. And the final aspect then of which this talk about is in the workplace, in employment. People living with autism are less likely to be employed long-term gainfully.
Absolutely. We know the statistics are terrible and they have not improved in the last 10 years, but think of what I just said. We've got later diagnosis than should happen. We're not supporting kids of school age anymore, and we've decided we're okay with that. And then we're expecting them to come out of the school system at 18 and be job ready. That is never going to happen, and I fear this is going to put us back about 20 years.
Well, and Nicole, there are employers there ready to take them, whether, you know, that are inclusive employers that are willing to give the time that might be needed.
Yeah, and I'll give the strategy absolute kudos here. They've really thought about employment. They've thought about inclusive employment. They understand that's there's some green shoots and we can build on that, but there's still a long way to go. The Disability Employment Service in Australia is far from perfect. And the stats don't lie, right? We're not doing well. We have to do better. So the strategy is important. I'm glad it's here, but I just want to be really careful that everybody understands there's a bit of jazz hands going on here.
And you'll keep your campaigning going and...
Well, it's our job to just remind everybody that good news stories are always important, but they've got to be underlying with fact and action.
Nicole, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
Nicole
you.
Rogerson, there, CEO of Autism Awareness Australia.